we're data supported as opposed to like data driven. We want to take in all the information. We want to use it. We don't turn a blind eye to it, but we're not going to just let it lead us.
My name is Walter Beede. Tonight I am joined by Vanderbilt recruiting coordinator Mike Baxter. Mike, thank you for joining us tonight, Captain.
Thank you, Walter. It's good to see you.
And I want to get started tonight, and I just want to tell people a little bit about, you just getting back from Vegas. So fall baseball at the college level is in full swing. Can you talk a little bit about, just to get us started, about what the environment is like for an incoming freshman during the fall of their freshman year?
Fast. I think it's a big transition socially, leaving home for the first time. Athletically, you're jumping into a new pool where you're the youngest, sometimes not as strong as some of the other older guys who've just been training for a little bit longer, obviously older in age. And then you're away from home for the first time. And at Vanderbilt specifically, kind of going into a pretty rigorous academic environment. So, I think it's a whirlwind at first, just kind of getting your feet on the ground. And, part of our development here is just try to help those guys land and just become comfortable in the environment, and then start layering on, maybe more developmental pieces as we go. But it's a big transition. So the fall's been good for us. We did a lot of strength and conditioning early. The Vegas trip we just finished last weekend was great. A good opportunity to go play a good ASU team. And we got 2 weeks left here of fall training where we'll do some more scrimmages and everything, but in Nashville now.
So now tell us a little bit about, for those that don't know Coach Baxter's background. Obviously, he played at Vanderbilt, but he also is a big leaguer. And I want to talk a little bit about, Mike, as far as from an offensive standpoint, we see a lot of Twitter, social media banter, about who to believe in as far as hitting and all the people that think they have it figured out. Wondering if you can talk about the individual approach to hitting. I mean, that's your forte. And how do you take guys that have, hitting instructors from home or for a travel organization, and then implement and, kind of get them to weave their way into the Vanderbilt program?
I think the modern hitter has access to more information than ever before. I think it's good and bad, just because you could learn a lot, but you could also lose your own identity. And I think having an identity is what separates hitters. I wasn't the best player. I wasn't the best big leaguer, but I got to hit with the best players in the world. And I always knew I wanted to get into coaching. So for me, I kind of used that as a springboard into figuring out if I had to coach these 3 or 4 different players, if they were all 18 and they were all very coachable and they showed up in a college environment and wanted to learn, how would you approach it? And what are ideas that are group level, that are kind of inalienable? So a lot of that's approach, timing, your plan at the plate. And then from a physical standpoint, that I think, maybe sometimes gets lost in translation on social media with different hitting philosophies. When you hit with these guys and you actually get around them, the guys that do it the best, the swings they generally look similar as far as patterns and video and everything like that. So when you're sitting and you don't have access to the player, you can identify patterns and similarities in the swings. When you actually hit with them and you get the truth from them, the way that each of these guys create that swing is very different, and I took that, that was a big takeaway for me as a player, as I transitioned into coaching, was recognizing that there's a lot of different paths to, maybe the optimal swing, or what we identify as the optimal swing. And I think of hitting in languages, and I think every kid and every player kind of speaks a little differently. And, I try to arm myself with as much fluency in the different languages as I can have, and try to apply it to what that specific player needs. So a lot of what we do here is on that individual basis, but surrounded around central tenets. And that's commitment to timing, understanding that you're committed to a pitch, you have a plan from an approach standpoint, and obviously barrel skill. I think when we talk about hitting, I look at it chronologically and from a periodization standpoint, where we got to develop the barrel skill first. We really have to be able to understand where our barrel is, how to deliver our barrel. In practice settings, we should be marksmen with our barrel, because when you get around major league hitters, they can do whatever you want them to do with the barrel. And I think a lot of times that gets lost. Similar with the pitching side, it's easy to chase velocity. But the skill to execute and pitch, the skill to execute and hit inside of competitive environments, to me, that comes first. And I believe if you build that, to be a good power hitter as you grow up and get older. You're going to get strength, but power is really a byproduct of accuracy if you're doing it right. So for us, that's a big piece of how we kind of approach the hitting side of the game here.
Well, I know a lot of questions are starting to come in, and a lot of them pertain to, as you as a recruiting coordinator, and you're looking at a prospective student athlete, what role do the analytics and the metrics play with regard to your pitchers or your hitters or the catchers with pop times? What role do metrics and analytics play within the Vanderbilt recruiting process?
I'd say a supporting role. They're definitely a piece when we want to access them to potentially kind of have a little bit more depth or maybe validate what we're seeing. I would say at Vanderbilt, we're data supported as opposed to like data driven. We want to take in all the information. We want to use it. We don't turn a blind eye to it, but we're not going to just let it lead us. We're going to watch. We want to watch and see the personality, the style of play. Does it fit our style? The way they communicate with their teammates, all of those pieces that I think when you look at our program's history and you identify with certain players, there's a lot of common personality themes inside those guys. And they definitely aren't quantifiable metrically, but we also recognize that there's a lot of value in that stuff out there. Maybe a little bit more on the pitching side right now, as far as, certain metrics that lead to, maybe elite type of stuff. For me on the hitting side, I'm still waiting to see things that translate to actual game performance. Exit velocity off a tee doesn't do anything. I don't really ever put any stock in that. But, if you're looking at maybe some game type of batted ball metrics, okay, a little bit of the sensors, maybe where you could see some rotational force and different things. But again, those are more supporting roles for us. And we want to continue to kind of evaluate the entire player through a holistic view and a human view, as well as a physical view.
Well, I know the questions that are coming in now. And folks, if you have a question, you're on the stream, you have a question for Coach Baxter, go ahead and fire it off here. I'll be able to read it. I'll be able to relay it. We're not going to avoid the tough questions. So go ahead and just fire those off. I want to remind folks, this is part of our weekly 9 p.m., Thursday night program. And tonight it's Coach Mike Baxter with Vanderbilt University. So, Mike, I want to ask you a question that came in during the week. How do you feel as a program, as the recruiting coordinator at Vanderbilt, with regard to the recruitment of players that are either eighth graders that haven't played a varsity game or freshmen? Do you as a staff kind of try to wait as long as possible with regard to recruiting? Everybody seems to be in a hurry, but where do you find the Vanderbilt staff? What point of view do they have when it comes to recruiting the younger student athletes?
As our staff individually, I would say we're probably more patient. I think on a person, this is just myself speaking now, I think it's a really unfair process for young kids to have to go through 14, 15 years old. Obviously, there's some industry issues with that because it is kind of become more universal. And I think it puts both sides of the equation in a tough spot. From a university side, obviously, there's the competitive aspect of recruiting where you identify players that might have some skill or some characteristics that you like. And you might be forced to make a choice where you got to say yes or no in that moment. And it could be at a very young age. Not really beneficial to the program. And on the player side of it, I look at it just from a developmental issue where I believe it kind of stunts the development of players to some degree, because I think it changes the reasons why we play at young ages. And really what gets you on the field in any of our environments at the high Division I level is the ability to go out to play to win and play to compete. Not so much to be seen, to be evaluated, to get personal kind of feedback, but it's to connect with your group and have a focus in on winning. And similar to what we were talking about earlier with the skill of hitting or pitching, that's a skill in itself. Learning how to play inside of a team environment. And I think the early recruiting kind of dampens that and changes the order of operations for some kids. So at Vanderbilt specifically, we do engage in earlier recruiting than maybe some other schools. But I also think we're probably in the middle of the pack inside of our conference as far as how early we're going. I would say compared to some of the other schools in our conference, we might be on the slower side right now, but I recognize our conference is kind of in a unique spot on its own too.
Now, for the record, does Vanderbilt have any, say, 2026s committed at this time?
No, no. The youngest we have right now is sophomore, so 2025.
So, with regard to college recruiting as a whole, pertaining to the high school athlete, do you feel that there's been a change, with the portal and the JUCO and the game being a little bit older? Do you feel that the high school student athlete has been affected with regard to these changes with the portal specifically?
I think all student athletes have been affected. I think you can kind of shine a light on the high school athlete from a recruiting standpoint. I think then you could kind of expand that light and put it onto young players inside of college and what that kind of learning curve used to be. I think it's steeper now because when NCAA granted free eligibility for 4 classes, that's going to increase the average age. You compound that with the MLB draft taking out 35 rounds one year and then dropping another 20 rounds another year. That's 55 rounds of player that disappeared for classes that were built easily 18 to 24 months prior to those decisions. So without a doubt, it affects the student athlete on multiple levels. The college game's older than it's ever been. Programs have adjusted their style of acquisition because you can definitely go out and get players that have more experience that aren't quite major league prospects, but they're really, really good college players. And I think it changes the landscape to some degree. I think in time it'll pass. This will be our final cycle this summer with, that free COVID eligibility for 4-year players. I know some junior college players might have another year or two because they got multiple years of eligibility back. So I do think the age will kind of return back to normal in time. The transfer portal was around. I mean, I was a beneficiary of the transfer portal. I went to Columbia first. I transferred to Vanderbilt. So, that's come and gone throughout the years. Now it's a little bit more accessible just because it's actually organized inside of the portal. And then you layer some NIL stuff in. So there's a little bit different, kind of calculus when kids might make choices. But as far as the age, I think that's going to come back to some degree. But I am looking forward to more of a normal environment here as everything resets where it's a little bit more age appropriate for the college player.
Now, on that topic, I want to do you feel that in light of today's environment within the college baseball landscape, do you feel it puts maybe more pressure on a student athlete or a family to play year round, to try to be seen year round? I personally think it's hurtful for, a younger player to try and play 12 months a year without resting or the strength component. But where do you feel with regard to the high school athlete? Do you feel that they may be pressured now to try to play more and participate more in these showcases and tournaments, et cetera?
It could be the case. I think it goes back to that root issue of why we're doing things. Why do families do things? Why do kids do things? If you're doing it because you feel like you need to do it to keep up and to be evaluated, I think that's probably not great because it does kind of steer you away from, again, that goal of why I play. Do I play because I get fulfillment from the game? Do I play because I like to be with my buddies? Do I like to compete? Do I like to win? Those are good reasons, and I think that's where when people look at multiple sport athletes, usually you play multiple sports because you like to compete and you like to win. And not so much that it hones your athleticism, which it does. It's kind of a byproduct of multiple sports, but I think it really does. The way we look at it program wise, it does a couple of things. One, it shows your desire to compete, your desire to win. Two, a lot of times you're going to have different team roles on those sports. So in baseball, you might be the number one player. You might be a high level D1 commit, but you might be the sixth man in basketball. Right. And all of a sudden now what you do is you have empathy. You learn what it's like to be a front role player versus a supporting role player. It makes you a better leader because it puts you in different environments where you have a different role on the team. And it's organic, natural kind of growth as opposed to, learning about it and hearing about it. So, that to us is some of the benefit of the multi-sport. We don't advise kids, but when kids kind of ask us our opinion on it, we explain it that way. And I mean, you don't get to do these things forever. So I don't think anybody that's given advice has ever given bad advice. I don't think when somebody kind of tells a kid, hey, you should focus in on baseball, they're not doing it maliciously. They're doing it because they're seeing some other guys get traction, right? They're seeing the growth and they're saying, okay, this guy did that. It led to this. That's a good plan. And again, it's going to come down to program, kind of philosophy of what they prioritize, how they evaluate, what they put stock in. And I genuinely am a big believer that there's a program for everybody if they kind of follow, what leads to being desired, which is having skill without a doubt, but there's all levels for that. But then being a connective teammate that focuses on winning and has passion to play. So, I don't think any advice is bad, but I just think kids and families should follow their instincts. Like, okay, my son's 15 years old. Does he have to play 12 months a year? Does he have to specialize? I would tell you no off the bat. The best players in the world don't do that, so there are periods of time where they play, there are periods of time where they rest, there's periods of times where they train. That is a very natural cycle. So, to me, that's important.
So we have a litany of questions that have come in, and I want to respect your time. And so the next question I want to ask is, how do you personally feel, or maybe as a part of a staff feel, about the reclassification of a lot of student athletes, whether it's through a post-grad year or possibly reclassifying, repeating a year? Do you feel that's become an active kind of a role for these high school student athletes that are trying to kind of slow it down while the COVID extra year flushes out?
It was happening before COVID too. Maybe it kind of stepped up more in COVID. It's become more normal. I think it's more common in just society that kids are starting school later at young ages. So you kind of have more older kids in general. And now you're seeing more of a rash of people kind of reclassifying. For me, it's not a manipulation of kind of the high school experience. I think there's probably times where it makes sense. But I think if it's just in lieu of like, all right, well, I'm not happy where I'm at in this. I have a vision of wanting to go to a certain level. I'm not getting that traction. I'm going to reclass and just try to find it. I think that player would be better served figuring out where he fits in and then finding that environment, going to it organically, saying, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to be really good while I'm here. Because to my point earlier, major league players, they come from everywhere. They don't just come from the SEC. They don't come from Division I. They come from all over the globe in all different levels. And I think the biggest thing as a player developing is to find an environment that, you can go in and get the opportunity to play. That's a big piece. We talk about that with our guys too. You got to be patient, but you also got to know what environment you fit in best and then do it. And that's a family decision. There's no judgment either way, but I don't think people should feel pressure to do that as much as it's just say, okay, where am I at in my current class that I'm in? So I can have the traditional high school experience and, be a student athlete as I was kind of brought up.
Now, a question that just came in, and it's an interesting one, but we don't hear a lot of college coaches talking about the metric or the recruitment of fielders. We talk a lot hitting, we talk a lot of catches, pop time, we talk a lot of pitchers, velocity, and so forth. What does it take for somebody that has a great glove to capture the attention of a college coaching recruiting coordinator?
I don't know if you can just look at a paper for that one, because if you're just going off a sheet and you're taking, velo from shortstop, one kid might crow hop and the other might play with the clock. That's more, beneficial in a game. So, metrically, it's really hard to boil that down. I think as evaluators, we're looking for game clock. A lot of that is what we're looking at: footwork, one rhythm throwers, two rhythm throwers, guys that can, funnel the ball into the center of their body and play through balls and create hops with their feet. I think that's a little bit harder to just put an objective kind of answer to. But I think good fielders definitely get noticed because it's hard to find real shortstops. That's something that's hard to find. You might find bats, you might find athletes, but guys that can play shortstop at a high level, they're generally hard to find. And if they're really good, they're hard to get to show up. So watching players move around, the rhythm they have really on both sides of the ball. Again, the metrics are supporting for us, but you kind of watch people move around the field. And for us, something that we love to do, and I heard this really when I started coaching, I was talking to Coach Owens of Rutgers, and we were just talking about evaluating players and everything. He's like, watch guys base run. And I mean, it was like opening up just a whole new light. And it's so simple, but it's so true. You can really see game instinct on the bases. You can see personality, aggression, feel for the game, under situational awareness. So when you're talking about the fielder specifically, you could have a 6'2" runner that can't run the bases. You can have a 95-mile-an-hour arm from shortstop that can't play short. That's where the metrics are short, but you can have a kid who plays up from a tool standpoint that doesn't really light you up with a 60 time, he's got tremendous instincts, and his first step is fantastic. And he's a great base runner that can take an extra base. And all of a sudden, those tools, even though they grade out average, they're playing up.
Okay, I got a couple of Mets fans that want to give you a extended golf clap for your catch in the Johan Santana no-hitter. I kudos to those three people that just brought that subject matter up to Coach Baxter. But they want to know, how do you value showcases as a coaching staff versus your camps that are held on campus at the Hawk?
We don't really cover a lot of showcases. A lot of our recruiting is network based. Guys like yourself, people that we trust, people that know what our program's like, that can recommend a kid, not just from a physical standpoint, but understand, this is the right kind of personality. And I think that's the case with all these schools too. So for us personally, the showcase, not as much. Camp, incredibly valuable. Even more valuable when somebody from the network reaches out and recommends a player, helps us get him to camp. There's an insight about the player prior to arriving to camp. When that comes from a network contact, that's very powerful. And for us, especially with the landscape of recruiting, like we were talking about earlier, it's a little bit earlier in age. The camp's our opportunity to get around it and kind of coach the kid, see how he responds. What's the aptitude like? What's the personality like? Does he get sped up inside of the environment? What does he like? Does he like the structure of the environment? Does he like the way that we go with our personal kind of energy and style as a coaching staff? So camp it's a very kind of key piece in our process. And a lot of our players have come through our camp, almost 50% of our roster. And we only have 2 camps a year. So we try to get as many kids through there as we can to get that good kind of evaluation from that.
Okay, another question that's come in: when you're recruiting infielders, is there a specific value to corner infielders as opposed to middle guys, or are they all just seen as infielders?
I think as we all grow up in the game, generally we play shortstop, and then we move to the corners, and we move to the outfield, and then we move to the bleachers. At least that was kind of my progress, right? I was a New York City shortstop who couldn't play shortstop. And a lot of people told me that at that age, and I didn't believe them, but, I wasn't a good shortstop. So I just moved around the field and then ended up being a pro outfielder. We want athletes, especially with our program. Coach Corbin likes fast players that have good strength, hand strength, likes rhythm, he likes the clock, those pieces that we talk about. So that generally keeps us in the middle of the field. I think when you start getting into those corner positions, from a defensive standpoint, now you're looking for something that might be an outlier from an offensive standpoint, maybe elite power or high level contact or left-handed, all those pieces that kind of help support saying, okay, he might be a little bit limited defensively as far as staying in the middle of the field, but he could provide this other skill for us.
Would you consider college baseball, not just Division I, but college baseball as a whole, in light of the fact that MLB has reduced, there are no longer short season teams, would you consider college baseball becoming the developmental arm of those younger players, 18 to say 21 or 22 now, with regard to Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I think it's a little sweeping statement just because, I think there's all different types of environments and programs. But I think when you look at what the college game provides that the minor leagues doesn't provide, it provides a competitive environment. And, systematically, when you look at player development in minor league baseball to what is expected in the big leagues, nobody cares about winning in the minors, or maybe a couple of organizations do, but that's not the priority when you're writing lineups, when you're putting players in certain positions and, kind of assigning, and making rosters. So I think what the college athlete gets is the ability to play 3 or 4 years where, one, they're age appropriate, they're in the right environment socially, just where they're transitioning out of high school, but they're not quite on their own yet. They have the infrastructure of like a university to kind of bubble wrap them in a sense and give them some freedom, but then they get to play to win. And like I said earlier, that theme kind of keeps coming back when we talk about recruiting, because I think a lot of times it just gets lost in this shuffle of evaluation and how you get offered. That's what I think development in college is. I think when you're talking about, hey, man, I played in Omaha, I did these things, I won a championship, I worked for something over 7 or 8 months and then either was happy or sad at the end of it. It's real. And those players that do get the opportunity to play professionally, it's pretty rare that they actually ever play to win again, because to do that, they'd have to be a big leaguer. Nobody cares if the Fort Wayne Wizards win, but a lot of people care who wins tonight's game, So that to me is one of the main breakdowns in pro baseball, is just those two environments are so different about what matters. Where I think college, even though the game is different, I think the goal is fairly aligned, where it's like, hey man, we're a group, we're here together, let's accomplish something together as a group. And that matters.
Well, I can definitely tell you that made a massive difference for Tyler with regard to the years that he spent at Vanderbilt within the SEC. I think college baseball is electric, regardless of the level, regardless of the division. I think college baseball is just a wonderful time period in a young man's life, collectively, with regard to academics and being part of a student body. It used to be you go to a short season team, you play in front of a chain link fence, and 40 parents that would come in to watch their sons play. So I'm obviously a big proponent of college baseball. And on that note, I get about 5 questions that have come in with regard to how does the SEC or college baseball as a whole, Vanderbilt, how do you deal with this national image and likeness? A lot of schools are using a lot of, kind of different pieces to that. How do you compete? How does it level the playing field? Can you level the playing field? Or is it just something that you're going to have to learn to live with within the college baseball landscape?
I think it's unknown right now. I think it's a little bit like the Wild West, where NCAA is trying to get their arms around it. I think it looks different in time. I don't think it ever goes away, nor should it go away. I think it needs to be corralled to some degree. But I think as college baseball has grown and college sports have grown, I think it's great to see players be able to put some money in their pocket and potentially, profit off of their performance. And then I think it comes down to each individual program on how they want to approach it inside their own walls. For us, I think with Coach, what he's built here over a long period of time, we view NIL as a tool potentially, where some of our guys are able to tap into it on their own a little bit more. But it has changed, the landscape. And again, I think the jury's out as far as, does it lead to national championships? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what leads to it, because you could look at the same in big league baseball. The highest payrolls don't generally always win, right? So there's so many pieces to it, and I think when it comes down to how families weigh that in the process, I think transparency is important, because you just want to know what environment you're walking into. If that's a driving force in your recruitment and you're looking for somebody that's providing that or leading with that, you want to make sure you go to school that does that. And if it's not, because you recognize, hey, if I'm going to ever be set financially, I'm going to make my money as a free agent in the big leagues until I get to there. Otherwise, I'm never going to be set. I'm really just playing. Then you recognize that might not be the driving force for you, and saying, okay, I want to get an education. I want to do these things. I want to go to this program for these reasons. I love what you said earlier about the development of the college athlete. I just touch on this before we move on, but I didn't mention the academic side. Going to college gives you choices. And that's the thing. You mentioned 40 people in chain link fence league. It's so true. And your whole identity is wrapped up in baseball, because you don't have a fallback plan. And really, the degree itself is never a fallback plan. You want everything. You want to be a big leaguer. You want to have success on the field. You can have some people might call your career a success, but you just want options when you're done, because most of us are done at 30, 35, if we're lucky. Most of us really done 23, 24. So all of that leads to the development. When you ask about the arm of MLB, to me, it's just a slam dunk that, you end up in school.
Well, my big thing was, and I speak candidly when I say this, and it's not just because you're a representative of Vanderbilt baseball, but I get a lot of people that will come at me and say, your son hasn't had a great career, this or that. And I stop them in mid-sentence and I say, at the end of the day, if you play a day in the big leagues as a child, and your dream is to play in the big leagues, you've been a success. But how do you measure success? And so at the end of this whole journey, it's about moments and memories. And college plays a large role in that. And not just if you won a national championship or an SEC tournament or an SEC regular season. It's about those moments, those memories with those people and those coaches in that city that is part of your life forever. not just in a career that can be looked at on the baseball encyclopedia and look at some statistics and say, oh, he was good. Oh, he was not so good. You play professional baseball, you play in the SEC, you're good. You play professional baseball, you're better. You play in the big leagues, you were one of the best athletes of the sport at that particular time. Case closed. So now I want to make sure that everybody understands Coach Baxter has been really generous with his time. I'm going to do a lightning round with Coach Baxter, allow him 30 seconds for these last 4 questions that have come in, and then we'll call it a day. So first question, how does anybody get on radar for Vanderbilt or any other college coach if they're from a rural area or just somebody that wants to get in front of you? What's the best way to get on a coaching staff's radar?
Well, the best way to get in front is come to camp. That without a doubt, that's the best way to literally get in front of us. I think the best way to get into the recruiting pipeline, you can email in, you can do these things, but realistically, it's trying to find people in your community that have had some history, or connection to people that have helped other players get to college. It's very network based for us. So I would say, if you don't have access to that, but you feel as though, you want to be part of our program, emails are good, but camp is best because it's irrefutable. If you show up and nobody knows your name, but you got real game, you'll make a name for yourself in the camp. So to me, that's the clearest step.
I tell parents all the time the transfer portal has been around for a very, very long time. This really isn't anything new. They've just made some changes, and we have to learn to adapt with that. Do you foresee any changes or any elimination of the transfer portal in the near future?
No, I don't see that changing. I think we're just going to see not player rights, but more benefits towards the player continue to come, which is good. And like you said, I think the transfer portal is hotter than ever because you've got more players in college, less players going to the pro side. And I just think we're in a little bit of an imbalance right now until that seesaw balances out, which it will, because it always does. I think that's why the portal is so hot right now. But it'll be a part of the game as we move forward.
Okay, question. Quickly, so I guess this is your opinion. In coach speak, when a coach says we will be in, mean. In other words, if a coach really likes you, they're going to engage. Say we'll be in touch. That could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but it's just a question that a parent has. Do you wait for the college coach to communicate, or do you get back in touch with them after a certain period of time?
Well, I think if time goes by and you need information and you get back in touch, I think you want to be an active participant in that. And, when I communicate with families, I just tell them right up front, let's just be very transparent with where both sides are at in the process. Because if kids need to make a choice and we're not ready to provide them an offer, or we're not at that stage, we're not going to hold these guys back. And on the flip side of that, as kids become closer towards being ready to make a choice, we need to know that too, so that we can kind of have ourselves in a position to move if we feel like we're ready to. So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to get back in touch, especially if that contact's already been made. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think then it's just asking for a transparent conversation and trusting that you have a relationship with the staff where you get it.
Okay, last question, and this is something that goes back to, and I always tell people that at Vanderbilt, everybody talks about the pitching, but if we look back over the years, they've had a lot of great hitters. I could rattle off a bunch of names, Tony Kempian, one of them, yourself included. But when you talk about ball strike, barrel consistency, do you as a staff offensively have any drills or specific ways of honing that skill with regard to barrel consistency or ball strike?
One, it's with the intent, truly, and it's as simple as what is the intent of the hitter inside of the most benign and simple environments. You're on a tee, you're taking toss, whether it's underhand, overhand, you're taking batting practice. I think the simpler the environment is from a challenge standpoint with low variability, I think the higher your expectation of what your output is. And I think if you're really focused in on accuracy and ball striking, you should be able to hit the ball at the levels and the heights that you want to, directionally as you wish. To me, that's just about intent. I don't think there's any kind of special drills for that. I think as you become more accurate and more I guess, disciplined with your barrel, then I think you could layer in some stuff. We've been using some foam balls from Driveline that are great. They really kind of magnify spin and they run. So then you can kind of up the challenge a little bit and start doing different things to push on that. But it really comes down to the simple task of, what is a hitter trying to do? When he takes a bat in his hand, what is he trying to accomplish? And I think for young hitters, we talk about a lot, let's just try to be as consistent as possible and hit as many balls hard on a line as we possibly can, as opposed to a couple good bolts and then a couple flares to the opposite field and a couple rollovers and say, well, I hit that last one really good. And I think that's where young kids can get off track and saying, I'm going to develop some power in the cage. I'm going to develop some exit velocity on its own. It's going to live on its own, but I'm not going to be able to stack up reps. So, the intent of the hitter and before a hitting session, what is the goal? I want to come out of here being as consistently on my barrel as possible. I think that goes a long way, as opposed to just picking up some drills and saying, this is going to make you a better, ball striker.
Okay, I want to say thank you to Coach Baxter. Mike, I really appreciate your time. I was just with Tyler down in Houston. Karen and I saw our grandson for the first time. Future Vandy boy, I think 2040, Tyler said. Bo Beede. I'm thinking he's going to be a left-hand hitting catcher because he's got that big upper body right now. So he said to say hello. I remember running into Mike when we were in Dodger Stadium. They were playing the Mets, and Tyler had a relationship with Mike Baxter all the way back then. I believe that was 2013. I think that was the year. But anyway, once a Vandy boy, always a Vandy boy. Want to thank you again, Mike. Want to say to all the parents, if you have any questions to discussion Baxter, anything at all to college baseball, put it down in the question comment section, and I'll make sure that I answer that. If you want to reach out to Coach Baxter, now Bax, I know you're not a big Twitter guy, but everybody's been asking me, is that you on Twitter with the blue egg with no photo on it?
No, I'm not. I'm not a big Twitter guy. When I was with the Mets, I got buried on Twitter too much, so I just gave it up. The strikeout against Kimbrel, they told me I suck, so I just move on. No,
he's only blowing 101.
Stay in my lane. Yeah.
How do they reach you at via email at Vanderbilt?
They just email into the account. I think baseball@vanderbilt.edu is perfect. And then it's all going to get forwarded to me. So just kind of put my name in the subject line, and then I'll do my best to answer any questions. Just kind of reference the show, the podcast here. And I definitely get back with anybody that wants to kind of chat offline. That'd be great.
Okay, I want to challenge everybody. If you watch this live stream tonight, go ahead and subscribe. It's okay. It's not going to hurt you. It's free. There's no money involved. Just hit subscribe. Give us a thumbs up if you like the content. If you are on Twitter, on Facebook, any place, find your way to the YouTube channel because we're going to have great conversations all year long in all aspects of baseball, both at the college, professional, and even the travel and high school level. Mike, thank you very, very much for joining us tonight. I greatly appreciate it. Please say hello to Brownie and Tim, and anchor down.
Anchor down. Thanks, Walter.
All right, Captain. Thank you, guys.